All right, it's time for us to get started. So as I mentioned yesterday, the first thing I want to go over is the Sprint 1 rubric, because now you will all have access to everything I think that you need to get started with the project. So I will be after class getting all the documentation that you need posted to be able to get started with that. I want to go over the rubric so that you can see exactly how Sprint 1 is going to be graded. So this first component is something you don't know anything about yet, but we will be covering, I think, in tomorrow's class. So user stories are a way of documenting and taking kind of client-driven language and starting to convert those into the first step, converting them into technical requirements. So user stories will be posted in Discord at some date that I will probably tell you tomorrow. I would expect that it's going to be early next week. Just for you to convert the requirements that you see into, from people's perspectives, how are they going to be interacting with your system? It's not technical, but it allows you to really get that sense of how are people going to be using this application. So these will get posted to Discord. Sorry. If I open up, do I actually have Discord on this laptop? I don't know if I have Discord. No, I do not. Otherwise, I would pull it up. In fact, I do have it on my phone, so I'll pull it up to one of the servers that we have here. So you will see that you in fact have a user stories channel, text channel under the Agile menu. This is where you will eventually be posting these user stories. So when we go to grade this sprint, we'll be looking for these user stories to be posted in that channel. Today, we're going to be talking about these two components. So Git branching and just in general GitHub usage and the usage of pull requests. So we'll be going over this in a lot more detail. Pay attention, stay tuned for the branching part of this before we really dive into the next piece of this. We will also talk about what a Kanban board is, and I'll also give you a lot more detail over the next couple of days about exactly how I want people to be using a Kanban board. Code documentation and readability. You can see the exact statements under each grading category of whichever one is the most applicable. So I'm able to quickly and easily understand your code base, and I would join your team instantly, gets full points. I'm looking for, and there's no specifics here, just looking at the code and the documentation. If my task starting tomorrow was, I need to make contributions to your project, how easy is it for me to just start making progress? If your code is documented well, if I can understand the layout, if I can understand the structure just by looking at the code, you'll get full marks there. You can see it slowly deteriorates from there down to, I'm able to understand little of your code base. I could join your team, but I wouldn't want to.
I feel like there's some biases. What if you just don't like them?
It'll be based on the documentation. Luckily, I won't have too much of a say in it. Hunter will be the one, the TA will be the one doing this, and I'll be making sure that he does it well. The actual design of your code, we're going to be taking kind of a higher level look at, is the design of your code solid? Would a 210 professor squint and say, why did you do that? Something like this. Do I understand why you did what you did? Did you make sound design decisions in how you approach the problem? 10 points for a README. Based just on your README, I should be able to figure out how to use your program. I'm going to throw away all of my technical knowledge, and I'm going to pretend like I am the dumbest internet troll I have ever met. And I'm going to see if I can launch your program and see if there are ways that I can misinterpret what you're saying. So you want to be clear, you want to be precise, give step-by-step instructions that are meant for someone to use this who does not have the level of technical experience that you do. So by following your README, I can build, run, and use your application. And you can see that it kind of goes down from there. So can I get it working with certain amounts of time and pain? So slight amounts of pain, moderate amounts of pain, I hate my life, there's no repeat, basically. 2 weeks from today, you're going to have your first client meeting. So Tony Espinoza has put in a virtual request for these UML diagrams, these UML applications. And your task will be to appease him. And for now, all you have is what I'm going to tell you, but he will give you more information on the second sprint when we do this, and you'll also be looking at the usability, the actual interactivity of your program. Not from a code perspective, but from a usability perspective. Is this easy to use? Does this do what I want it to? So this needs to be part of your design process, thinking from the user's perspective, not just does it check all the boxes, but how easy is it to use as I check off these boxes? So that's where you would get dinged for usability. And I've also told him to throw away most of his technical experience and expertise. So he knows what he's doing, but he's going to pretend like he doesn't. So it still needs to be usable from that perspective. These 15 points are the only 15 points in this whole thing that is, did you do exactly what I asked you to do in terms of, did you get everything working? So you can see that you can get most of the credit, even if you only get a couple things finalized and working, as long as you adhere to the rest of this process. If you are working well together, if you're documenting everything we're doing, which is what we're going to be talking about next, if your design is solid, if your communication is there, if you're using GitHub and branching appropriately, then you can get up to 85 out of 100 points with absolutely nothing working. This class is much more about how do you make progress in a team, and I will argue that this will be easy if the rest of it is easy, which is why we're not weighting it that much. And that way you don't have to feel bad if, or too bad, if one of your features just isn't 100% working. Please do try to get it working. This is something that I would love for all of you to add to a code portfolio that you could show a prospective employer. But it's not just about getting whatever grade you get in the class. The better this is in general, the more useful it will be as you go find work in this field. I want there to be something that you can show from the work that you did in this class that will be impressive to those employers. 5 points for Discord activity. We're just going to make a pass over Discord. If you're talking about something, make sure that you're documenting the discussions that you've had in Discord. Do that communication. Don't do it over text. Do it in Discord. And that way, if someone who ends up needing to join your team and the documentation is a little bit iffy, the first place Hunter and I are going to go is to Discord. What were people talking about when they did this? If that's documented there, it's a little bit of work to go find it, but at least it exists. We want the majority of how you produce this to be in groups of 2. So we'll be looking at pair programming as a way of doing this. So there's a meetings and meeting logs channel in Discord. As you have any meetings that you meet in person, in groups, log those. If you are working together, someone sharing their screen, we'll talk about pair programming as a way of actually making progress on these things. If you pair program with another member of your team, log it. And you will get points depending on how much of the development was done using pair programming, because it is very effective to be working with someone. So I'm just going to take a break here and explain pair programming in case you haven't done it before. It's not just 2 people working on something at the same time. You each have roles. You're going to have one active developer who is writing the code. Another person is taking the more abstract approach, thinking about, is the code that's being written doing the overall, can I optimize that in some way? I'll start working on the documentation while you work on filling out the exact lines of code. So the documentation is there for what we're doing. That way we're all on the same page about what's going on. If you notice a mistake in the programmer's programming, point it out and fix it right there. It's just one fewer issue you're going to have to go search and find later. So someone who is on the line by line thinking about how do I do exactly what's happening, one person taking a more abstract approach and thinking about, is this going to work? Is this the best approach? Starting discussions about how could we optimize? How could we make this better? Are we thinking of everything? What about this edge case? What happens if the user does this? Finally, meeting logs, we're just gonna be looking for, can I actually tell what your group did by looking through the meeting logs? So that makes up the full 100 points for the sprint. And do note that not everybody in your group gets the same grade. We're gonna go through, we're gonna mark this out of 100, that is the baseline. Starting next Tuesday, you are all going to be filling out a survey about your own effort and technical contribution to this sprint, as well as every other member's effort and technical contribution. So make sure that all of the work that you are doing is visible. That means that as you are doing it, you are communicating what you are doing. You are pair programming with not just your best friend, not just the person you best pair program with, but make sure that you're spreading your time across the different members of your team so that everyone starts to get an understanding of what it is that you are adding to the project. This increases the bust factor that we talked about on Monday and that you read about in the book. If you were to get sick, someone else could take over for it because they worked with you on that particular thing. Questions about anything regarding the rubric? Yeah.
There's a certain format you want meeting logs to be in.
Doesn't really have to be anything terribly meaningful. I would just say who attended the meeting, how long did it last, a summary of what we discussed and results of that. So something like just what are the takeaways from that meeting? It could be a theoretical meeting. We divided up the labor. We met in lab. We divided up the labor. Here's who's taking each particular chunk of this upcoming sprint, who's going to be responsible for making sure that everything like that is done. Just make sure that it's as informative and useful as possible. None of these things should feel like busy work. It should feel like I'm adding documentation for, assume that you're going to be switching teams after the sprint and you were going to move to a new team and you want to be able to as quickly and easily as possible catch up with all of that. So add any documentation that would make that process easier. Great question. But no, I'm not going to require a specific format. It's mostly just a, can we tell what you did? Other questions? I like to think that it's pretty straightforward. I try to make these as detailed as I can so that you can get a sense of where it is. And if something is highlighted, like when you get a grade back and it's highlighted that, you know, here's where you were. You know, I needed to do a little bit more than that to get to the 5. And if you really disagree with it, then you can come to me and we can talk about it. I always like talking about the grades that I assign, because there's a reason for it. If the grade is not what it's deserved and you have a reason to believe that you deserve a higher grade, I want to hear that argument. I reserve the right to say no, but I at least want to hear you. All right, so this is going live. The other thing that's going to be there are all of the requirements for the sprint that we went over the very first day. So you'll get a sense of exactly what you need to do. The remainder of this week and the start of next week, we will actually be going over the basics of UML. So for those of you who didn't go over UML in your 212 class, we'll actually all be on the same page for that.
It's 212 again?
Design patterns.
Oh, okay.
One of the prerequisites for the course. Depending on who you had, we will cover a little bit of different material differently. I don't know if UML was a part of any design patterns course. It wasn't one that I taught. I taught it in winter and spring of last year. So everyone who's coming from one of those design pattern classes has probably already seen the UML content that I will cover. So what are we actually doing today? Who's had a chance to go through some of those basic intro Git from the Git site and had a chance to actually read and get familiar with some of the Git commands, how to use it? If you haven't done that, today is going to be a little bit more painful. I want to talk first about Git flow. So Git flow comes from this page, it's one of the Git tutorials. And it will be the requirement for how branching has to happen within Git for this class. Otherwise, it gets extremely confusing and you will end up doing way more work. It seems like it's going to be a reasonable amount of work, but just like with code documentation, the more work you put into it, the less can go wrong. And for those of you who have handled really gnarly merge conflicts in the past, you will know that those take a very long time to untangle. And even though you get the code to a point where you can move past a merge conflict, maybe there are still issues that arise due to that conflict later on. So we're gonna try to minimize the frequency and pain of every merge conflict that we have in this class. It will still happen. It's just a necessary evil. So if you have more questions about this, you can read this page. But I'm going to disconnect this for now and just kind of draw out what I am envisioning for the flow of each of your Git projects. So who can tell me what a branch is in Git or GitHub?
Like an addition you add or a change?
Like, yeah, when I say a repository can be broken down into its branches, or what's a branch? What is a branch? Yeah.
Might be poorly explained, but like
Fine.
a branch is basically each person's contribution, right?
Okay, that's
Like-
sometimes how it is handled.
Like a copy of the main one that you changed before you push to the main, so you don't.
Yes. So think of it, Git is a form of version control. And version control is important when you're working by yourself, but it's really important when you're working with other people, because in real time, you are all working on the same files. And unlike a shared Word document where you can all be making those changes live at the same time and see what's happening, in terms of coding, it's much better if you basically just check out the current snapshot of a project, make some changes, and then try to integrate the changes that you've made into the project once you finish it. So you will see that a brand new GitHub project has two main branches. The first one is called main. And it is what gets initialized. So I'm gonna state this as kind of, this is the point in time. So think of the whole thing as like a timeline. This is when your project is created. And this is when you stop working on it. So, the end of finals. You're never coming back to this project again. Hopefully you do, but I won't know about it. So, timeline between when it's created and when we stop working on it. So this is a snapshot in time right when the project is created. There's very little, just what is auto-generated or what you decide to put in main. There's another branch called, and it keeps going between dev, develop, and development. So whenever those three, they're all refer to the same branch. Git flow says that we don't want to just make changes. Each of these are going to have a certain meaning associated with that branch. The main branch is going to be your release branch. The only time that changes are made to main is when you turn in a sprint. All of the work will have been done elsewhere, and once you finish all of that work and you're happy with it, you're going to update main to be the version of that project. So here is going to be sprint one's due date. Here is going to be sprint 2. We'll have sprint 3. We'll have sprint 4. And we'll have a final code submission. So sprint 4, I think, is due on the Monday of finals, and the final code is due on the Friday of finals. So anything, there's no final in the class other than a brief presentation of what you have done throughout the course. We will meet during that finals period, but just have some brief presentations. So there's no exam in this class for you to prepare for. The time that you would have spent doing that is going to be working on feedback that you get from sprint 4, stuff that you didn't have time to finish. It's not quite working. The rubric for the final code is gonna be exactly the same as the rubric for sprint 4. I just want to give you a chance to do something with that feedback and change anything you were unhappy with and you submitted sprint 4. So here is kind of the timeline of what the main branch is going to look like. There should be no commits, no changes to main in between each of these releases. Of course, more work will need to be done. You can't just code an entire sprint off on your own and then hope that it all works. So what does that look like? We're going to kind of zoom in here on just this chunk of time between creation and sprint 1 due. From main, you're going to check out and create develop. So develop starts as just a copy of that initial project. And in here is where you are going to push all of your completed features. So you are going to go branch off of develop. You're going to go do something useful. You're going to test it, you're going to make sure it works by itself. And then once you are fully happy with that feature, you're going to merge it back into develop. So between these 2 points, we're going to see some times when some features are done and they're going to be worked on by different people. And eventually, the scope of develop is going to merge back into main as the completion of sprint 1. And these would be the required features for sprint 1 that are done by different developers. So this is all that a base project gives you for free. However, you're going to divide up the work. You're going to be each responsible for different pieces of this sprint. And you're gonna need a place to go off and do some work in a way that one of your teammates doesn't overwrite what you do while you are working on it, because that would be a nightmare to figure out what happened. I wrote this yesterday, why is it gone? I wrote this yesterday, why doesn't it compile anymore? It compiled yesterday. Someone else made a change to it if they had access to what you were working on, and they changed it for something that was their own part of the project. But you'd have to try to figure that out. So you want completely separate instances of the project. You want to take the snapshot of something that worked. You want to go work on your own thing. Once it works, you want to merge it back into the project. However, if you and someone else both take the same file and you make changes to that file in ways that are incompatible with each other. So I work on a function, you work on a function, if they're completely separate, that's fine. We can merge those back together and both of those functions exist separately. But let's say there's an existing function and I need to change that function for what I'm using or I'm developing, and you need to change that function for what you're developing. When we go try to merge that back, 2 different changes have been made to existing code. That's going to create a merge conflict. That's something that you're going to need to figure out what happened. What is the final version of this file look like that does what you need and what I need? So you don't want to try to auto mess with a merge conflict. It's time to get together with who worked on this file. Let's have a conversation about what does this file need to look like? What does it need to do so that it works for what you need and for what I need? Once you do that, you both copy that file into your local and you merge that, and the merge conflict will be gone. Yeah.
If you work on the function yesterday and merged it, and then I'm working on it today and merged it, it's not gonna show up as a conflict. Is it?
It will if you both checked out different versions of this. So when the first person merges it back in, it's gonna be fine. When the second person tries to merge it in, you'll get the merge conflict. Because you'll be trying to basically, you can think of every single line as a difference between what it is and what it should be. So it won't allow you to change what exists, you can only add or remove. As soon as you have a change, that's what flags the merge conflict.
It's gonna say, hey, this isn't the same as when you check it out.
Right.
Okay.
So you can only work on completely separate tasks at the same time. If someone, on the other hand, merges something back into develop and you haven't started working yet, as soon as you do start working, you want to check out the part of the project with that completed, so that you can interface with that completed task. So it becomes a big convoluted, complicated communication task between everyone to know what is everyone working on, what are the potential conflicts, what are gonna create those issues. So let's talk about the branches that you need to create as part of your project. Everything above develop in this diagram is going to be a feature branch. And you're going to create a new feature branch for every feature that you work on. It's not just going to be me, the developer, I have my own branch. You're gonna create branches with the task of, I wanna do one thing and exactly one thing. As soon as that thing is done, you're gonna merge it back into develop. If you need to start the next feature, you're gonna make a new feature branch. So I'm going to say that this branch, feature one, done by student A. Is going to branch off of develop from right here. So when you make a feature branch, don't branch from main, branch from develop. Or dev or development, whatever it ends up being called. So you're going to branch from here. And you're going to slowly make some changes and note that you're gonna be pushing every small change that you make, probably. Because you need an important commit message with every commit that you make. I've changed this file to add this small functionality. Great, new snapshot. So you're slowly going to make changes and test the whole project as you do this. As you complete this, let's say now this feature is complete. I'm going to merge that back into develop, and that's what becomes this update to develop. The change from here to here is going to incorporate all of these changes and add them to the project at this point. Let's say we have another feature branch from student B. They're gonna branch off of this exact same point in develop. But maybe they're a little bit delayed in getting started and their project is a little bit easier. So in terms of this timeline, they don't really start until this point. They only make a couple of commits and their project is done, and this merges down and becomes this commit to develop, this merge back into develop. But
So this stops the merging issue where merge conflicts, by creating different branches and then we put it in.
when you put it in, you can have that conflict right now. So if this merge creates a conflict, you know it had something to do with one of these additions from before. You can go through this commit history and you can say, what did this merge do? This merge was responsible for the changes in the file that I'm seeing created that merge conflict. Who did this merge? I'm gonna go talk to them, to that developer, about why they did what they did. So that I can figure out how I either interface with that or what changes need to be made so that we can both move forward.
Just override it. No big deal. This fourth push.
Yes, if you use force push and I see that force push, that is immediately going to be a massive red flag. It will get the project to work. It will, at least GitHub will be happy with you. It will say things are fine, and you will find that your project is totally broken, completely borked in whatever you overwrote. The functionality that you thought was there will no longer be there. But
Alright, and just to make sure I fully understand it, that conflict, merge conflict can come from like if my module references your module and you changed like a variable is gone, right? And so I merge after you do, and now like that would.
right, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and there's always a reason behind those merge conflicts, so there's a reason to go look at what happened, what should be here. From my perspective, why isn't that there, or why is that gone, or why was this changed for some other purpose? And at least you can always go look at the commit history. You should always be referring back to this. There's the concept of the head. The head is what points at the currently active version of this. All of this history is stored. You can restore any point in this history of commits. You can say the new active version of develop is right here, not right here. Undo all of this, go back to this point. You can always mess with the entire history because it is stored, it's all visible. You can look at every single change that has ever been made to any branch. But note that main is really important to have. This is your release branch. if this is a game, because I love talking about games, this is, version 1 of the game, version 2 of the game, this is every patch that is released. This is what players are playing while you're doing all of this in preparation for the next patch. So the currently active development, each feature that's part of this development cycle. And then, all right, we're gonna release, we've done all of the testing here to know this is the best that we can do right now. To the best of our knowledge, it does everything that we need it to, release it. Or this doesn't do anything like what was expected, but it's the due date. So you can see how this process works. Like you don't want to reuse this branch later because this branch should be labeled exactly what that feature is. And that way, no one is questioning what's being worked on right here. The name of that branch tells you who it is, and you can see that one person has been making all of these commits. Or maybe a couple of people who were pair programming are making these couple of commits.
Out of curiosity, in any of your previous classes, have you ever had a student accidentally delete the develop branch?
I have not had that happen, thankfully.
I'm writing first.
Yeah, new experience incoming.
Can you even do that? Just like have
You get full privilege to do whatever you need to do to this. Just like with Unix operating systems, it expects that you know what you are doing, so please know what you are doing before you do anything too insane.
Dash RM.
Yes. RM star,
RM star, dash RM star.
pseudo RM star, bad idea. Good question?
So if you think about this, main branch and then the DevOps one. If we think about this as a book, we are writing a book and then we have the book there and then one student's gonna write, page 1. And then return the book, next student's gonna write page 2, return the book. So that's why we are making sure that I'm writing page 1, nobody else is gonna do that at the same
Right.
time. And then, so at that point, are we checking out the whole book or just one page at a time?
The whole book.
The whole book, okay.
Whenever whatever is part of it, so develop here, let's say that this is a blank book, this represents chapter 1. This represents chapter 2, this represents chapter 3. This represents chapter 4. And this represents, section 1. So we check out the blank book and make the associated changes. If someone completes chapter 1 before I start writing chapter 2, sure, I want to copy the book with chapter 1 so that I can write chapter 2 with the knowledge of what's there for chapter 1. But if we're all trying to write chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 in parallel, then if the person who's writing chapter 3 makes some change to chapter 2, or something that goes in chapter 2, while this person is writing chapter 2, that's what's gonna create the merge conflict. We need to figure out what actually goes in chapter 2. Is it what you put in chapter 2, what I put in chapter 2, or something completely different? So that conflict resolution will be, all right, we need to move forward with one existing chapter 2. We can't have branches for your chapter 2 or my chapter 2 anymore. So that's a good way to visualize it or think about it in terms of chapters, pages, sure. Does that make sense? People have questions about how this makes sense and how this hopefully makes developing in a group as easy as possible? In theory, this completely eliminates all merge conflicts. If we have perfect communication, we're all checking out and working on different aspects of the code. Even if we're working on the same file, we're working on different parts of the same file. And we're going to have merged back in the changes before someone else checks out and works on what I was already working on. Maybe there's a bug in what I committed here. And so someone else later on needs to go check out and work on chapter 3 again. But that should only happen after we've merged chapter 3 back into develop. I should be working on chapter 3 and you're working on chapter 3, both making changes at the same time. Alright, so this is Git flow. Just like you can see this entire history, so can Hunter. So can I. I see who commits everything. Every commit is public. I see exactly what you committed, and I see what you check out. I see where you committed. So there is 100% accountability for adhering to this model. If your group does not adhere to this model, I'll be able to figure out who did it, what happened, and why was it responsible for all the headaches that it caused.
You're gonna see so many curse words when I'm trying to figure out the problem. Just gonna be honest with you.
That is
It'll be
perfect.
very violent with us.
I think you end up having to be. Computer science is not for an optimist. I have met very few optimistic computer scientists. They're all pessimists. Actually, that creates a fun story that I think I have time for. My first TA experience was for a CS1 class. And we got lots of non-majors in that CS1 class. And I met this student who was just this incredible optimist, was working on programming, like, this is gonna work this time. I'm really excited to see what this program is going to do. That was her approach at the start of the semester. Midway through the semester, I would walk in for my TA office hours into the lab, and I would just see head face planted on the keyboard. Hello, are you alive? Just want to make sure I don't need to send you to the hospital. The face would be keyboard on the face. Computer science turns optimists into pessimists. At the end of the semester, she was saying, there's no way this is gonna work. I think it's gonna work. There's absolutely no way. Something's gonna go wrong, right? Great.
Pessimism, it's realism.
There's no distinction in computer science. So it's okay when things don't work. That's just a necessary part of this field. People will make mistakes. Just do your best, and especially initially, to adhere to this model. And Hunter or I will let you know if you're not following this model for some reason. But from today's perspective, I just want to make sure this makes as much sense as possible to people. Where you're making these branches whenever you're starting a new feature, some new functionality that you're gonna add to the program. You work on just that branch until you finish it, you merge it into development or dev. They keep changing the name on me, quarter to quarter, it's different. And then when you finish a sprint, you're gonna merge that into main. And then the latest submission in main before the deadline is gonna be what we grade. So this is the actual code that we're gonna look at. We'll look at the process here, but we're not grading any individual aspect of this, aside from, we're looking at the commit history to see, does this adhere to Git flow? If you have questions about it again, just Google Git flow. And you'll find that tutorial page that talks about why we do it this way, walks you through exactly this idea. Note that as you look at your commit history in GitHub, this is probably going to be vertical rather than horizontal. So the beginning of the timeline will be at the top, the end of the timeline will be at the bottom. I prefer to start looking at it left to right. Just because that's how I visualize a timeline, but you may need to swap between thinking horizontally and thinking vertically. That brings up a funny point. I'm gonna show you something that I originally found on Reddit, because I do way too much finding of funny things on Reddit. Speaking of swearing, I'm about to do so in class. On camera? On camera.
Oh, no, it's
Just letting everyone know, if you have a problem with it, cover your ears, especially those who are remote. If you have a problem with it, cover your ears.
You're gonna get demonetized.
And eyes.
Why is she playing the 10th string there? I don't even know how that.
Yes.
I like that. For those who don't know, guitars on average are 6 strings.
Yes.
8 strings are super deep ones. 10 strings what Mick Gordon used for the Doom soundtrack.
Yes.
That is what.
Yes. So I find that to be pretty darn funny. Any questions about the diagram here before I erase it? Does anyone want to take a picture of it? In case that's useful, I can disconnect this momentarily if anyone wants to do that. Something similar to that would be around on the internet, but it's kind of I like this, it's a baseline of. This is how it works, this is what you wanna be striving for.
Thought you were gonna start cussing.
I was gonna read it, not deciding against it. This is the field where you can usually get away with it. You're teaching some kind of gen ed course, there's always gonna be some English major that says, I'm a language person, and that's not something that I'm ready to. That's okay, that's valid. I find most computer science, I do it at home. I do it at work,
I'm doing it right now.
I'm doing it in my head right now, exactly. Is
Sometimes it comes out.
there a question somewhere in that? Yeah.
Super held up.
Are we gonna be invited to a Git group? Yeah.
Yes, so the repositories are created, I was invited to them this morning, so we were just setting up the last couple of conditions. And you should be receiving that based off of the submission of your GitHub username, hopefully today.
Also, you're creating the starter projects. for us?
Yes, yeah, it's just gonna be the absolute basic of a default, but you will all have rights privileges to your associated project. So you can, as soon as you get access to it, you can start making changes to this, make sure that any change you make, and here's the Git flow.
Sprint one's due this weekend?
It's due 2 weeks from Sunday.
Oh,
2 weeks from today is when your first client meeting will be. So you have to demo kind of the best working version that you have right now. You'll have between that Wednesday and that Sunday to get everything finalized. So yeah, sprints are 2 weeks usually in this class. I have a little bit more leeway for sprint one because you're learning a bunch of new technologies. So I want to give a little bit more time where possible to get things ready, but future sprints will all be 2 weeks. I think with the exception of wherever Thanksgiving happens to fall, I managed to manipulate it, so there was an extra week in there for Thanksgiving. Sure.
Two questions actually. So, Spring One rubric, is that posted on Canvas yet? Are we able to access that?
As soon as I make the assignment live, the sprint one assignment live, the rubric will be attached to the assignment.
Second question for our lab today, I feel a little idle. Are we supposed to be doing anything, just getting some practice in or?
Yes, yeah, that's the next thing we're gonna do after, I wanted to talk about this. There was one other thing I wanted to talk about. What was the other thing I wanted to talk about? We'll just get started with we're gonna be talking about actually how do you use Git commands to do all of this branching. So some people have preferred Git applications that they like to use. Git Kraken is very common here in the intro courses. I like to use either GitHub Desktop or just straight off the command line. Depending on your environment, you'll have your own preferences. If you have no experience with it, play around with a couple of them and see if you can find something that works for you. I'm not gonna dictate exactly what software you use. Like what? That reminds me of what I was gonna talk about. So we're used to using some kind of IDE for our development, right? And you can just compile and run directly in the IDE. You've exported as a jar before in Java, right? So exported some kind of executable that can be run directly from the executable. The reality, unfortunately, is that projects in the real world are more complicated than that. You're going to be tying together all of the work that you've done, all of the code, all of the testing files, everything that needs to be done together, and you can write programs about how that build process is defined. That's what your IDE isn't going to support quite as well. So each language has some build tool or multiple build tools that you can find or use to do this. Some of them have integration into some of the IDEs that you may want to use. So IntelliJ has built-in Gradle, for instance. The two for Java are Maven and Gradle. For this project, you will be needing to use them starting probably in sprint 2. So I recommend just getting it working now. So one of those technical requirements for sprint 1 to add to your, it's a pain to get to work if you've never used it before. It's not something that I'm going to try to walk you through because we have multiple different languages in here. I'm not gonna dictate whether you use Maven or whether you use Gradle, or if you're in Python, whatever it is that you choose to use for building your Python application. But you will need to get some experience with that by the time that you're trying to build testing into your building process. So do some research on that in the meantime. That'll just be part of the on the side, do some research into that. Today's task. So before I actually click on the tab, I am going to have people pair up. If there are, stay within your group, but pair up within your group. If there are 3 of you in the group or an odd number, a group of 3 is okay, but I would prefer 2 to 3. Figure out who you're working with.
You suck.
Yeah, talk to other people.
You told them more.
It's me on my. That's what I thought. I didn't do it. Yeah, we're just.
Nobody's here.
If we are breaking.
This site is the best site that I have found. There's no way with the tools and technology that I have in here, I could come close to just giving you the level of autonomy that helps you learn exactly what Git commands do and how they affect a diagram like the Git flow diagram that I drew on the board. So that's exactly what this is going to do. This is a long sequence of tutorials. This is not a lab that is going to be due. There is no grade associated with doing this or not doing this. If you do not understand most of this content, by the time you go to make changes to your repository, your teammates will hate you because it will not appear to Git flow, or you'll use the wrong thing, accidentally doing something. As your teammates hate you, they will start grading you down on effort and technical contributions because you're just doing the wrong thing. Why are you doing the wrong thing? Well, I didn't finish the tutorials from this Learn Git branching site. So it is very important that you do this, as well as some of the basics of this may appear on the quiz that is going to be a week from tomorrow. So I'm very unlikely to ask you a regurgitation type question, like, what does git commit do? I will ask you something like, when is an appropriate time to use git commit in the projects that you're working on this quarter? That requires you to know what it does and how to apply it to the project for the quarter. When should you use it here, now? When should you not use it? Give an example. Design a scenario where it would be inappropriate to use this particular git command.
That sounds like short questions, which make my brain.
They're the kinds of questions that I ask all over for any kind of. Basically, I want to make Hunter's life as miserable as possible if he's going to be the one grading. Think of it that way. I hate my grader, I'm gonna make his life as miserable as possible. I actually love my grader, but I'm still gonna make his life as miserable as possible. So it's not enough to just know something, you have to know how to apply it, or know it well enough to be able to answer a question in a bit of detail. All right, so everyone can go to, can we see the site, just learngitbranching.js.org. If you just Google learn git branching, this will be the first result. So how does this work? So you'll see here are all of the tutorials. So you probably don't need to do too much within the advanced topics, but through the Git techniques, tricks, and tips is all very useful for the work that you will be doing in the class. I'm not going to be writing quiz questions about more than the absolute basics and how to apply the absolute basics, but if you want to start interfacing with Git at the level that you would need to be a developer in industry, then it's worth going through absolutely everything here. So you can come back to this as you have time. Remember that it exists after this class if you don't get through everything. But I recommend doing as much as you can ahead of next week's quiz and before you start making too many changes to your repository. So the reason I have you working in pairs is I want one person driving and I want one person thinking in the abstract, exactly like you would in pair programming. So as you are trying to figure out what commands do I put to do what, one person is thinking critically, one person is also thinking critically, but entering the commands and initiating the discussion so that you have two people working together so that it doesn't feel quite as lonely. If you end up with questions, something doesn't make sense as to why, I'll be around. I'll be checking in with groups just to see how things are going. But I find that this kind of autonomous learning is much better than me trying to drive and asking the class, because no matter what pace I work with, most of the class is gonna wanna work at a different pace. That'll be frustrating most of you. So it's better to just do it yourself and let me know if you have questions. Any questions about the task? All right, let's get to it.
All right, we need to do anything in row?
We didn't do what, sorry?
Promote tab?
We can even do it.
No.
No?
Yeah, I would actually recommend this.
Three of which minutes were made.
I can't listen.
He designates errors for visualization. Maintaining history is great for everyone working on progress.
Okay.
Take it, minutes, snapshot of the project, minutes are very lightly. I typed it. See what this looks like. Right, we have like small story or 2 minutes.
It's like we're doing it.
There's hint button.
I just don't know if that changes the name.
Go. Just make changes to the top for synchronous. One. Which references which then goes based.
You can be like, you know, there's.
Oh, do I need to like?
I have no idea, it's just clicking on stuff.
Whatever on those. It's not like an interpretive thing, it's just like.
Great job.
So, we're on the introduction right now.
No worries, I'm just waiting to be ready.
Oh.
I'll go back.
Yeah.
Like as well.
Yeah. Why it popped out? Yeah.
That makes sense, yeah, that was actually.
The word this can.
Oh, yeah.
I'm pretty jank when I get it works, I've never like.
This will be good experience, I think, for everybody.
I got some, I do a lot of checkout.
Yeah.
So I have, set up, yeah, They should, you know, so now the kitchen, make sure I have the keys for both.
Right.
That's the word.
And so that's what.
You guys know, we should, like, you don't know what's, you guys know, it's just like setting everything to my.
I'm in the same boat.
To my,
There we go.
so just for, to set files of.
Yeah.
For some reason.
I see for. Yeah, check in on. But then like freeze up there. Oh, space, check down. Command is still. Command. I don't think. I don't know. If you say, well. We're gonna keep it some. They're all trying to get branching, what's the video? Make a branch name. Like, no, it. It's be plus. Check it out, take that. Gigs, check out.
I really like the command line because there's not usually a ton that you can do with it. But for really complicated projects, I find myself sometimes using GitHub desktop, but I haven't used Gitkraken at all.
Well, I started Gitkraken because. Scary, it's so hard, it sounds like it's coming on the bottom hard.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, I didn't want to be on the time where we're actually at the line. And I was like, get push, it's two commands.
Right.
It's just working with yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't believe I avoided this for a year. Check out. I feel like you don't need like.
Okay. I'm actually gonna put that on there because you get bad. Check it out.
Yeah, now check it out. I started. So that's it. I need to start over.
Start out easy. As you get into them.
Yeah, we just started, yeah.
Yeah, you walked in right as I was.
Yeah.
And go. Yeah, you missed my lecture part of that, folks. This is big.
Yeah, so when you mess everything up, that should be.
What are the instructions?
Well, no.
Yeah.
Alright, making important ideas, actual accountability, and everything. Control. It's good.
I'm gonna keep my own call. I got it on my drive in another state. Go back it up every weekend. I'm sorry, now I'm getting to check it.
Oh,
Get check out.
To switch over to post.
Now you're asking.
That'll work. That's right. Solar radiation. Like that all.
When I saw it.
Yeah, I think you need to know that right.
Also make payments, like a hard drive, go back and down to check out. So program my own, like, make a brand new thing. And I'll post it, get another side terminals.
Work, well, just wait a second.
Spread out enough.
That's why I never.
Raised.
Another time.
You're trying to look up command.
There you go. Get the code tattooed on you. There you go. What's that code? Oh, that's my backup for a project. Oh,
I'm in Maine right now. Oh, I got it. Get word bunches. Get word bunches. Bug fix.
Whoa.
Yes, Ready whenever you are.
I'm on work. Is finally.
Oh, yeah, cause.
That's the same color.
But then we should. And then you can wish to marry two sides.
Oh, it's gonna give it to you, it's gonna give you everything. Yes, it's pretty good.
And then you commit it.
Yeah.
And then you can merge them.
So you gotta make the book.
There's a section.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah, because. Check out just solid.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, you check out this. Yeah, check out that.
Yeah.
What is it, so we did,
Well, you guys don't have that?
No, I mean, it's not directly translating.
Oh, dang, that's good. That's a-
It's like, if you see that something has happened, how do you look at that?
I mean, that could also be. But I'm gonna go check this out.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna go check out this movie. But.
There you go.
I think that you will be having, I think a community strain.
Because mine.
Oh, so-
Oh, right, you're right.
You get to basically.
It's like a.
Oh, yeah, back, I was like,
Open up the, yeah.
So there's a lease environment. Yeah.
I'll do you a legal project.
Yeah.
So there's the release version of the game. So you were slightly- The release. We did Eventually you're going
Oh, when you building your own, you know, like, I had
And then I'll just swap.
You know, restart, one of the sections, cause like.
Yes, I'm fine. I would relaunch it.
Okay.
Our solution is.
Project by.
Sorry.
Alright.
So we're just writing.
Oh,
yeah. Should I sit?
I'm not sure if you have to stand there, but French or
Well, probably use the bus.
probably have to stand the bus. So we first get around the ball, right? Where we have to do it.
Great. And we did what's responsible for the app development process. The creators of the tendency, so everyone is.
Yeah.
And they say, well, we went.
No,
So you're out.
Yes. It's always the way around, yeah. Have you heard of it? People worry.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just keep it, same with the student. Yeah, so I'm starting to. Oh, what did you say?
May not.
And then, and you know what, Tony?
And you can change. But this default always, it will work the same exact thing. If you notice. Makes it a full ass, but you can push. Yeah. Goes round back. Yeah. You don't even have to. I hear
So,
Yeah, it's supposed to be made.
it's, yes, because
So you never want to merge main into something. You only want to merge something into main, and you only do it.
We just did it 4 times.
5 times.
Get going every time.
Can we start over? Is it like a reset?
Never check out main, switching to figure out. You only want to merge development. The only way main is gonna get you. Those, like everything from new code should be created and pushed. There might be merge and do this. It's slow.
oh, no, you're on, you need to go back to.
Wow.
You have to make the branch and then check it out.
Check out the feed and.
Oh, wait.
So keep,
Yeah.
Oh, yes. No worries.
yeah. If you want to it's not, you were thinking the kid, yeah, I know. Like, if you want to. They tell you that it's back, it's here, now, right? So now. CD. You get the like an headed. So you didn't do like all of right? Yeah. I'll come
Don't have enough side.
I think it's, that's why I use like keep bracket, it's just like. Oh, yeah, drag and drop. There is plenty of time remaining for go to your.
And this is not.
Relative.
Yeah.
Nothing is just, yeah. Oh, this is practice. Is it two? Oh. Oh. Making sense to start. Right. And then you can't say
Yes.
Yeah.
Everyone else has had this.
That's sort
Are the groups doing back here?
You're used to the Linux style. It's already right there. So do as you working with.
We already know who's gonna screw this up.
Like horizontally?
Yeah, it compares, it shows you line by line, which code is which, and you just click and choose this person, or both, you can try best to combine it.
So now, we're on with, now we want to merge up into this.
So you copy and you say, hey, let's take care of branch and merge it. And then. That's how I
Our solution is
Oh, I think I'll use technology.
Check
out
the main project.
You stopped on this?
Yeah, I found it. That's pretty cool.
And I
It's like a merge.
Let me actually start, let me do that one. There's actually a way to do this.
Yeah.
That's called a pull request. So you finish something that you think is complete. That's your argument. Or you merge it in.
That would really was.
It's just a different way to
We'll let you do it until someone else also says yes.
Okay.
So someone else in the project also has to say, thumbs up, to create a check. If you're gonna do that, you're gonna open a pull request. Someone else in your team is going to review your code. And is gonna say, yes, that looks good, or no, I see some issues. It emerges if both people say yes. And later on, we're gonna talk about code checks. And we're gonna find ways to integrate tests into the project way, and also do that additional layer on top of it. So make sure you're gonna be writing tests for your code that says, according to this specification, all of your cases are gonna you write a bunch of tests. Whenever you want to submit code that becomes part of your project, when you do that merge, it's gonna run with those tests. With a single test fail, that merge back. But if this test fails, we need to go figure out why this project now isn't doing the right answer. In this case, because now, this does not. No, because that would require you to go deeper like what you did, you just isolate from whatever change between when you checked it out and when it came back in. So you know that that's because of some of the things when you checked it out and when you merged it, which makes it easier to find where that bug is. All of those are just going to be Maven or Gradle to use this system where when you merge, you're going to be running all of the as part of the The idea is you always have a working version of the project, according to the methodology. Had to at least okay the code. So.
Should we?
No, but I will be doing
Our
it, it's like.
documentation
Yes.
or whatever to convince some.
Actually,
Project leader.
All of those tests are gonna be project-wide. So you're gonna together write tests that cover all of the, basically it says, okay, here are all the project. Here are hundreds or thousands of units that check to make sure that the project is complete. Even if someone else can submit it, you're gonna run all of those tests that are written up, and if one of them fails, even though they give you a like your version.
You do it right.
The person.
Just make sure.
Can I understand what you're saying?
It's really easy to play.
If he's smart, you can comment on the code, or even based on what the code's going to do. This company is here for how it's done. Are there unnecessary chains of ifs, or this needs to be broken up into the. Code review, that's someone's code. And I just that number, or when you code. So are there any improvements that I can make to your code?
How they were created, GB based, how they. It's just copies and.
Yeah, it's not.
Does make sense?
Judy would be able to go into your
It's way to be.
as I am.
I accidentally. Force, it's like push and pull around my bags.
Yes. Very bad, but yeah, it's a very controlled environment, and this is how development is done.
I accidentally.
You don't have full autonomy over everything locally on your machine anymore. That's just too much power in a group setting. Any one person has got that.
Because I said, I was like, I'm done focusing, guys. I'm not even gonna pretend to anymore. I was like, I'm like, trying to focus on.
Yeah. It's really nice. It actually prevents a ton of things that could be wrong going wrong.
I understand it, but also it's like.
Oh, I think.
It's all I did was you did that.
And you also talked about the readme file. Readme was this file that we say about information.
You can imagine that now I'm a user, you develop something for the general.
No, that's,
The general public, they want to use your application. Check out what it is. How do I settle it? How do I run it? When I do run it, how do I interact? Those kinds of things. It's just like the first place to look if something that assumes with us.
I think as a user manual.
Yeah.
It'll be hard.
A manual for your application.
Manual.
Yeah. A readme is really just a how to use.
Yeah, that's someone else laughing.
How do I interface with this thing that you created?
Application that part of the data. Sure. I have to sign it in.
I won't respect myself.
So I'm
Well,
talking.
even how do I launch the application? Are you giving me an installer, like the installer to look through the installation process, and then you see executable that creates? Do I need to something to have this program built so that I have?
You actually, I think it's slow.
I can even interface.
I'm not sure if you right there.
Yeah, assuming.
Otherwise, you're sending a level of technical.
It's like actually.
That is either a part of the group group that knows how this project. So if you look for any application that you use will have some kind of readme, usually it's a markdown file.
Oh, I thought you meant.
The auto-generated readme
No,
and
no,
get the
the
repository,
Lose
read
this
this
one, but
document.
wait, I wanna see that one.
There's a place to put it, like how to use. But yeah, you can include screenshots of your program if you want to show kind of, here's the general flow of. But sometimes that's just inherent in a program, but going from this bunch of files that are on GitHub to using your application, that process can be very.
Oh, no. It's
Walk people through how to use the technology.
not too long ago, summer, I really let myself go.
myself.
And then I was traveling, I was
If you want to, if you want,
my height, I'm not.
Defend
So not.
Yeah, you wait. I thought you just.
So I like this.
Like,
Yeah.
No. But no.
Using a program, you have to design it for all sorts of low levels of technical competence. People who have never used it.
Doctor.
This is what
It's very.
People who've never used this particular technology before.
And I have to explain a lot of things,
Responsibility.
You know, I figured it out, a lot of people, I'll measure that, I know.
Quite a lot of this, it's about the user experience.
Yeah, that just happened all of a sudden one day,
Put yourself in the shoes of literally anybody who might want to use your application, or their experience to use your application. It's not the same as your experience, the developer.
so this file is just the developer, the technology.
Right. Yeah, it's just a how-to. Yeah. Usually, yeah, that's on the developers. It's the marketing people aren't gonna know what the technology is.
So just.
We're gonna appreciate it. Say how cool it is.
Like the example we saw in the before.
Yeah. It's a big reclining chair and it's hanging from a tree. It's a bunch of experience. You think of another use for that, right? It's not hanging from a chair.
Words aren't. Nothing is happening, I'm like sitting. I did some change, sorry. Well, it's, but this is going.
Doesn't that go? Doing okay? How's it going? Any questions, finding it intuitive?
Finding intuitive. Yeah. Lots to learn. There's a lot of.
The head is just the active part. So maybe you've made some changes and you realize, you know what? Some of this was a mistake. I just want to go back in time. I just want to get in my time machine and pretend like this last week didn't happen. You can move the currently active part of development to something else, and then if you branch from there, it'll branch from that piece of history. Instead of where you currently were. Right.
But it's for people you did make.
So that you could set the head back to there and develop from there if you wanted to. Sure.
You wanted to go back.
So an example of how I've used that in the past is I used autograding. And I made some changes to one of the labs in ways that other professors really didn't like. They wanted to use the historical version of the lab, and I wanted to use the lab with the changes that I made to it. So I moved the head back to somewhere in the past and branched off and wrote some additional tests and some additional functionality to the lab. And now, whenever another professor wants to use that lab, they kind of get a, do you want to use option A or option B? And they click that button, click OK, it makes them get it. It changes the head to whichever version of the lab they want to use. So it's not like it's a different release, it's a different branch of the development of this lab. Yeah. Yeah, what version of the game do you want to do? Should I go back in time and use the old, play an old version?
I didn't know how to.
With old ballots, with back in the good old days, or it became a cesspool of whatever, or do you wanna use, you wanna play the cesspool?
Yeah.
Play League of Legends. I did not say that.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Yeah.
It's not very, it's like something you're in now, like you can start.
Yeah, that's all good.
Yeah, there's an active community of the same people who do it constantly and find like substitutes for everything. Yes, they do, that's what demographic.
I have an idea.
It's not like.
Oh.
Yeah.
You can even go on the website and hit, instead of typing the prompt, we can just post that to them. And you can pull it. It would, one more from day, or they just refresh and tell you it will also. One is visual friendly, one is command.
I think I would be commanding, more, it gives me more. It was more kind of.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
That's what it's used, right now. Well, you know. Yeah, this.
That's everything.
Because you're basically in the pseudo, not touching any of your personal stuff. Everything is just. You play around.
That's literally back to that.
Understand.
Yeah, the advanced topics sort of getting better.
You got home money.
No, man, they don't pay for anything.
I guess branch speaking. That might be good, but like, yeah, basically what we make. Sort of.
Whether you're going for it.
Yeah. Great.
It sounds like you were.
Yeah.
But first nothing happens and.
Yeah, yeah, the any problems you look like. What it really is.
Learning and go to the site.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, I exactly know. I was. I forget when I was years ago. Telling people that this class, all the other rest of your focus.
Yeah, that's the worst case scenario.
It's not
The box.
Right, so, yeah. Those nice sandbox, that's, I'm just.
Yeah.
So, three, right?
Yeah, I think we technically go till 2:50, but I'll be around.
Okay, fun. And then you can.
Oh, okay.
Being the one.
Yeah, inheritance and stuff.
But they will switch now, but.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't you have?
No, you have. It's right. Three basic ones.
It's not.
Oh, yeah, that might be.
Because then you need.
Oh, I was thinking that. Or it came, like, I came up so that's, yeah.
Forget all about it. He doesn't
Forget, how have I never thought of that?
Just forget about it, that's the thing about
Forget.
Check out.
Yeah, I love.
See you tomorrow, guys.
Never say that
I hear it.
JG word.
Oh, I feel exactly.
I avoid the option, then later on you can just right click.
I'm using the alternate. It's free for students.
That's, we'll have to go.
Let's read it quick, because you already have the. It's not gonna change ours, so it's gonna keep our settings.
But you just say, I love it.
Just be careful. When you hit the next menu, just be careful. Because you want to keep your settings, right? You have certain settings that you want. Right. You have certain fonts or something. Yes. Do not the say you're on open first, so not the way where. Yeah, I need those blank. Once we install it, you're gonna go right back to it. We're just adding some feature to your business cloud.
You leave it till this.
I can just open. Right click.
Okay, see, as you local, push back here, then you and you have to push.
Shortcut.
Are you gonna install command line? What should I download again? Into the.
Do
you have the downloads?
Well.
Okay, so then. Push.
I feel like.
Alright, guys. Hey, guys. Yes. I'm out of here.
Yeah, it's like.
That push, that.
So we've got about 20 minutes to go in here, but I wanted to talk about one thing, and the people who left are gonna regret it. We're gonna eventually talk about this a little bit more in some kind of more of a lecture format, but I wanted to kind of introduce you to a GitHub repository. This is one of the repositories for one of the groups in here. I just picked one at random. And one of the ways that you're going to be interfacing with this, I mentioned in the rubric before that there was this section for utilizing the Kanban board, the GitHub usage issues and pull requests. So I wanted to talk to you about exactly what those are and where you can find them. You can see them here as the issues tab and the pull requests tab inside of your GitHub project. So issues have historically been used just for issues, but it also is how we have integrated the use of kind of a to-do board. And as you start deciding who's going to do what as part of sprint one, you're going to start creating, here are all of the tasks. And we'll talk about this as we go through one of the slide decks that is coming, I think, tomorrow. But you're gonna learn about how to exactly kind of write cards of tasks that need to be done as part of this. And you're going to take those and put them in so that we can assign people to those tasks. And you have estimates for how long those are going to take in terms of kind of a large, medium, small, not really more detailed than that. Then finally, every time you merge into the develop branch, when we were talking about the Git flow, every time you do this, you finish a feature. This is gonna be done through the use of a pull request. So you're gonna just come here, click the new pull request and basically say, here is the branch that I think is ready to be merged into develop. And I would like someone to review the code that I have written. to make sure that it adheres to a level of code clarity, documentation. Does it actually do what I say that it's going to do? That's, I think that it does. So it gives multiple different eyes on the problem. And basically you won't be able to merge or allowed to merge into develop until this pull request is okayed by one of your fellow teammates. So that's the part of the rubric that is using the GitHub usage issues and pull requests. So you're gonna be, here's where all of your tasks and assignments are going to be documented. Here is where all of your pull requests are going to be created and interfaced through. So someone can say, hey, I'm free to check off this pull request. And you can post either here or in Discord to say, I have a pull request ready. Is anyone free to take a look at my code? And that will allow everyone to know what everyone else has been working on, spread the work amongst all of you. And so that's, I just wanted to clarify that part of that rubric, actually pulling it up in one of the repositories so you can see where to go and how to handle it. More details on exactly how you should be doing this is coming in lectures. So I just wanted to tie that to the rubric for now. Questions? Okay, I think that's everything from my perspective for the day. Of course, I will stay here until the end of lab, but I'm not going to be introducing anything new past this point. I'll just be helping you with whatever you come up with for issues as you do as much of this Git ranching as you can. Keep at it.
Visit. I don't need something. Like if it's more than it's like us. The name is real.
What I had to get her.
And I mentioned that best friendships are lost. When you choose
I'm
the
working
same
on
team.
it. I'm working on it. I'm burning the bridge down.
They're like, I really like yours.
I don't know if you saw an article, but I had. Get where mountains on top of each other.
I love that. We gotta have some fun with this, right?
And they're.
Especially if you have application, right?
Yes. Yes. So.
Hey, if some jokes make their way into this, we gotta keep that morale. This class is gonna be different.
I might put a rubber duck in the. That's why. Help me.
Please do, we can get more, something like a rubber duck image, so we can react to people's things. Whatever fun we can have.
More than likely, to be a unicorn in the neighborhood. I love it. Because I have an active rubber duck in the past who is helping me talk about this.
Yes. I probably have rubber duck in the back of my monitors.
I got that in actually AP comp time, so we're all.
Nice.
You were in first, but.
What is wrong with sometimes Kevin might have fallen across the. Did you? I don't know.
Yeah.
If fast.
Better to do it, better to take it out. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to say, but sure.
By the way, it's not even realized that I want to. So like it needs. How like. But yeah.
Version to the.
You don't actually need to put in, you can actually just type it all out. You can actually type in all the. What the hash is. Sure, you don't have to do this. So it's like. Yeah, like my application and process, right? But do you think like? What's the point we should generally be at, by the way? Like, what's the lesson point?
I would say, you want to complete as many of these as you can.
And that's why you use the.
Yeah, they'll make your life easier. I don't have an effort. You'll see, this is make your life easier. As you learn more, it'll save you more time and you'll see eventually more in general, but.
See, this is why.
I'm halfway through each work, moving work around. So you've done these four, and this one?
Yeah.
That's good. I would get through a mixed bag, I would do all of these. And I would go do the remote,
Full and full.
at least the push and pull.
Okay.
Landscape remotes is useful.
Okay. Gotcha.
At that point, it's kind of useful things versus necessary. Yes. Oh, where you know? That's better.
Installing that. You didn't work on that.
Oh, I didn't.
Favorite button.
Oh, I didn't.
Override everyone else.
I've heard there's a lot of people did not like it.
Just do system, CD system 32, pseudo system 32.
Great idea.
That's remove stars.
Yeah.
I get what it was saying. I just sort of
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
I just-
People really.
I just watched it.
I use you as well. Yeah. When we run one more.
I don't look at.
I use another application that I bought a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Go and read, they use a important book is usually,
Yeah.
and then you just listen to it and drive your car.
That's what I do. Like all the lectures and everything is media, but then just put it out there.
I know, I'm over there. I was.
So I think.
I would be reading the same line.
Oh, to go up.
From here to work, back to home, and then.
Yes, you were doing. Yes, yeah, it's great, just. Sometimes that's, when I want to listen to it, oh, I'm reading that one. Remember, I want to write all the notes, that's how I make.
With. A couple of notes.
That's exactly what I was actually listening to make book. I'll be like, oh, this is.
I did, so what I did this one that.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I want to show you the.
One, which you're currently checked out on that and see. Or whatever. But I just pick one. So I think it's.
Oh.
I don't know.
All right. Yes.
Yeah, this is. See, it opens up this. See, it's already. So I can edit these at the same time. Instead of having split screen. I have one screen.
Yeah.
And you can. All of the different little things like you. I don't know how you.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, right, serious.
No worries.
I love this. So like. You don't have to pick this up.
So good.
So, you know where it is.
The target is in downloads, so you don't know, and then vehicle two.
Yeah. So you can write it, right?
I think so sad, so I just gave it a shot.
Ta-da.
But I just don't.
So you can just.
That's just.
You know, so, but I'm just excited about it.
Yeah.
It's-
There you go.
Okay.
Okay, let's do it. I know, it's there. Like wonder people, but. I'm not the Vim user. I can lose the Vim user.
I love it. Oh. And one very important use case. Opening massive text files. Have you ever tried to load a text file that's larger than a gig into any other text editor?
Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah, it's like, sure.
Yep.
I'll only load the part of it that you're in. Very nice.
Shown which I remember looking through 1,000-page PDFs for CA 260 CSD. Oh, yeah, just looking through this 1,000-page document, to find the register number you need to move this over.
Yep.
This is.
My experience with it was a 66 gigabyte text file
Okay, so
for every 5 minutes, every building in Poland was recording how much energy it had used in that 5-minute interval over the course of about a decade. So I opened that text file and wanted to use some machine learning.
All of it.
All every single building ID, 5-minute interval, here's when it starts, here's when it ends, here's the kilowatt hours consumed. And here's the building type code, so it's like commercial, industrial, residential.
Damn.
Lots of data there, and then you want
Yeah,
to
it's like
do
Word doc.
something with all of that.
You can also download an extension and it will
The main
tell
research
you the
question
size.
is, can we give someone money at the start of the month and say, congratulations, in the upcoming month, you saved a bunch of money by not using as much electricity as your neighbor.
It's all.
And you start taking that money away if they use more energy than that,
Incentivize neighborly conflict.
Yes.
Yeah.
basically,
Make the HOA worse.
yes.
I like it.
And you can kind of handle it, I just want to.
Uh,
Be able to remember.
10 minutes left. You
Next
guys-
lecture sequence, so if you go to our algorithm,
Is there anything that needs to be talked about?
close the canvas, if you go.
I don't know that.
You go to our.
Big large comp.
There are these 5 slide decks that was all. First 2. Yeah.
Go to the next week, say.
It's basically.
No, we
someday
need to.
I'm gonna get up.
I'm literally right.
And then I list
Literally
the
right.
requirements for, you're gonna, you can start almost anytime, but you're
Specifically.
gonna want to start. Request kind of what people do. Basically, after I get started.
Base and mass are
Tomorrow.
Because class.
I have another mode in there.
Okay.
Oh, gosh, this was not 3 years ago. I did not take my T12 to change. I took it with AMAC. And I did,
It has been an interesting course.
and I did not learn how to properly write tests. I did not properly write.
See, I don't hear that from anyone in the other divisions who took it before I started teaching it.
So
Everyone
you
says,
can,
"Oh,
the pressure was
class
really
everything."
bad.
I didn't learn anything in it, I don't know anything about any of that content.
I know.
It was just kind of a do it and I've done it, and great, I got a grade for it.
Well, it was like 211 to 212, I was like, damn, I don't know. And that was a big leap.
Yeah, but the structure is right there. There's a.
But it's really amazing is that 212 didn't go away after this year.
But like.
So are they combining the 212?
Get back for like future.
So in the short term, the answer is we don't really have something to put into place because we don't have any professors to teach anything.
Demo somewhere
Schedule.
that you wanna create.
Scheduling
Just
nightmare.
create it,
Teaching
in the same structure.
Try to work things into everything.
And you can
So
copy some of the.
what I wanna do
the
is
headers.
move kind of the UML and testing parts of it into the end of the slide.
Have you shared
And
this
say
yet?
that really
No,
the
because I'm still
part of
waiting
that
on
course really
Hunter's,
should be the start of data structures. Because.
So now-
we're
and that-
never
now
taught
push
to
that.
in 211.
Yeah.
And I kind of.
I will push the branch. And then you guys gonna have.
Maybe we have one that have all sort of that same work where you get into 11, really no clash too much in 300.
The other basis of this is
They about to.
Yeah.
You start,
Yeah, so I think there's bang for that. I'm gonna push the first couple of weeks.
Because I will be on a different.
And then I wanna push
Should be
all
you
the
start
design
design
patterns
job where it's
into this
17 and you start with
Because
21,
as
yes, and I start with 22. You see where this is going?
Actually, on my laptop, I'm gonna leave it.
Exactly, so you see where this is going, you be starting
After
after
that, this course is talking about our design
21
have
LTS.
people go out and learn what they are rather than.
I'm on 22.
You are, I did.
Rather, have kind of the overview at the end of time.
Trust me, once you pull it, you don't, it will
And say,
automatically.
here, go write up some technical document about these design patterns, talk about some of the uses, some of the.
I'd say that's more time.
That one.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I feel like
And
this
then
whole-
able to apply it directly into a project that you have the code.
Scroll down
Right.
in file
And then one of the requirements, like, all right,
look for
table you have now, and now
XML.
you can use any design pattern, but I want there to be 4 instances of different design patterns. You choose whatever makes the most sense for your project.
I think that makes sense.
Oh, right here.
I think that will do the same thing all did, but remove kind of the abstract part of it. You're learning something, but you just can't apply it right now. It's like a stupid API.
Single dependency.
It's kind of.
That's why I felt giving. This is useless, but I need to assign something. I would rather, yeah, I want design patterns to be part of this class and be something that you do in this project. That's already gonna be something that have to pass for, but as soon as it goes away,
Designing this.
I want.
So does it, okay. Well, it wants to be in the same version.
Yeah, so when you pull it,
Okay, so
if you don't have the JDK or the automatically asks you to install, then you have to do it. You just- This is gonna be on 22. So it will be on, I think if you scroll down. It should be the first block. We're gonna keep it on the dependency of something.
Lots is over. Ooh, I'm a bad boy though.
And then.
That's all 1 minute.
Yeah, we'll leave the recording with that. Aaron says he's a bad boy. That's the last thing, he's here, before the recording ends. It's on.